Introducing myself. Hi, everybody. My name is Alan Shi. I use the he, him pronouns. I'm one of the programming directors at this conference. But prior to this, I spent 2 years in investment banking at RBC, and then I did a 1.5-year stint at a private equity firm. And now I am starting business school, really as a way to pivot into these broader careers, and I'm really excited to learn more about them, just like all of you are.
Yay! I'm so honored to be co-moderating this panel with Alan. I wanted to give just a, this is how we're framing the conversation. We're having a panel discussion to showcase the broader careers students can enter immediately out of college. As you know, O4U has traditionally catered around the business functions that fall under consulting, banking, financial services, professional services. And we wanted to really introduce you to folks who are rising professionals or, possess a skill set that is going to be a little more expansive in our definition of business. And so I wanted to hand it over to, Nicole to introduce themselves, and then Nicole will just hand it off to the next folks.
Cool. Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole Tay. My pronouns are she, they. And I guess for my background, I have a master's in public health from Columbia in social epidemiology. And in my spare time, hobby time, I am an expert in blockchain and healthcare. And so I mostly speak and write on the subject. And my full-time gig is that I'm a senior copywriter at a pharmaceutical advertising agency in New York.
Awesome. I'll pick it up from there. My name is Rachel. I'm the director of sales strategy at Frame.io. My pronouns are she, hers. I graduated college a while ago thinking I wanted to do investment banking. Had a very brief stint in banking, quickly realized it was not for me. Spent the last 6 years after graduating at a venture capital firm. And then over the last year have jumped to the operating side to work at a startup, which is where I am now.
My name's Jake. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called eNotice. I graduated in 2019. My pronouns are he, him, and I have just kind of bounced from one startup to the next. So I actually dropped out of school to work on a company called Quorum, and then went back and finished my degree, and then started eNotice, and I'm now about 1.5 years into working on that company.
Awesome. So excited to have all of you with us today to share your amazing stories. So I kind of just want to level set, after a weekend full of meeting professionals at these really amazing sponsor companies, I think it's really easy to get lost in the sauce, so to speak, and forget that there's so many ways to enter the business world, and every single one of these pathways is equally valid and also completely able of setting you up for a long career of success. And we at O4U would really love to highlight some of those career paths through this panel. So if you could tell us a little bit, everybody did already, and I'm so glad that all of you are here, talking about your paths. And we know there's obviously tremendous pressure to join many of these really well-worn career paths due to the prestige, the structure, the pay, all of the above, so many things. And I certainly know I fully got into investment banking when I was undergrad, and kind of really just stuck through it and didn't really have time to breathe and really think about what I wanted. So Rachel, you mentioned that you flirted a little bit with investment banking. So could you tell us a little bit about why you decided not to take your return offer after your summer internship and instead chose to pursue VC and growth equity?
Yeah, so Alan, you noted that my flirtation with banking was very, very brief. I was in Hong Kong for about 3 months, which is where I'm originally from, doing a banking internship with Credit Suisse, where I was on their capital markets team. I rotated around equity capital markets and debt capital markets. For those of you who aren't familiar, it basically means you're working with companies to either raise debt or raise equity in the public markets. I found the work interesting in a couple of ways. I had graduated from a primarily liberal arts background. I was a political science major, computer science minor. Really didn't really know what quote unquote business meant or finance meant. And being at Credit Suisse gave me a good idea of that, right? I learned how to do the basics of technical financial modeling. Going into banking, I thought would help me open up a lot of doors. And it was a great opportunity for me to just learn and dig in and just do the work. There were a couple of things that really just didn't work out for me. One was I generally thought that the work-life balance was pretty off. I think a lot of people would agree with that. For us, we had a rule on the floor, which is if you went home before 3 a.m., the team was overstaffed. And it was a codified rule that our banker, like our MDs told us on the first day. We had a couple of folks who were able to leave work generally by 2 a.m. and they were switched to different offices because the rule was that hard and fast. And so I think, I wasn't quite ready for something like that. I certainly didn't want to spend the first 3 years out of college working those kinds of hours, because I also wanted to develop as a human being and make friends in a new city and just like have a life. So that was one thing. The second was that it was really structured. It was a highly structured program. I think it works for a lot of people. It wasn't really what I was looking for. And so, knowing exactly my lane, exactly what I was going to do day in, day out, focus on the very nitty gritty of building a deck or the very nitty gritty of inputting numbers into a financial model was not my idea of something that was, something that I wanted. And then very much later, I realized that working in banking opened doors that I didn't necessarily need or want to walk through. I think we overall are trained to think that leaving as many doors open as possible is a good thing. But if you start to think critically about, is this direction one that I want to go into, you'll quickly realize that actually maybe turning it to another path that doesn't open as many doors, but leaves all of the doors that you still want to explore open is good. And so that's a big and very long-winded explanation of why I ended up deciding not to go into to banking afterwards.
This next question is for Nicole. We know that you also flirted with consulting and would love to hear more about the thought process behind that, especially considering, fun fact, Nicole and I went to college together. We went to Wellesley College, and Wellesley does not offer a traditional, business track, finance track. And I think one of the best things about organizing this panel was that when I learned about this topic of broader careers in business, one of the first people who popped into my mind was Nicole, because she has so many different experiences, ranging from being a filmmaker to also, working at H4B Chelsea now, and also doing blockchain solutions consulting. So would love to hear more about that path as well.
I'll just summarize that by saying, y'all don't ever let anyone tell you that you have too many hobbies or interests and you need to be more siloed in that, because at least I can speak for myself in saying that it's because I have all of these interests that I'm unrelenting about letting go of, that I feel like they're able to feed into each other, and I get inspired all the time. I find that it's a lot harder for me to get into a rut creatively, just because there's so many areas that I can tap into. Like if I have an issue with one of my films, let me go tap into some of my blockchain experience, and maybe there's a cool sci-fi slant there that I didn't consider. So all of this feeds into each other. But to answer your original question about consulting, yeah, I out of Wellesley, I graduated with an English major and a bio minor. And so I was looking into doing healthcare consulting mostly, especially because I had two friends who were already doing it at Accenture. And so they're like, oh, Nicole, you're so good at problem solving and thinking on your feet and stuff, and you're really creative. So I think this could be a really good track for you. And I think that similar to what Rachel was saying, I think that as undergrads, we get told this story about oh yeah, you just want to open as many doors as you can, and then like just kind of like, as long as you have the opportunities, like that's enough, you know, you've done your job. But I do think that having been sold that narrative about consulting, I think it was almost a blessing for me that I did not hear back from any of the places I applied to. Just like the sense that, you know, talking to people more about like work-life balance, for instance, I would not have realized at the tender age of 22 that I really cared about work-life balance, and that I like having, I like being able to sign off at 5 or 6 and go do my filmmaking stuff, or like go socialize, go throw a party or whatever. And that's something that makes me really happy and fulfilled as a person. But as far as like where I thought consulting could lead me, I think that I kind of dodged a bullet personally, but you know, it can definitely be a fit for others. I don't want to knock that.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the vulnerability there. I feel like it's really intimidating to be at this conference. Like, we literally have hundreds of such incredible students in our midst. And so for you to kind of come forward and say that and share that is really, really meaningful. Jake, this question is for you from one of our attendees who are writing in their questions through Pathable. Would love to learn from Jake about the decision to forge your own path through startups. How did you get comfortable with the idea of taking a path that feels so much less comfortable with so much uncertainty embedded in it? And just how did you navigate that, especially as an undergraduate student?
Yeah, so I was a software engineer by training originally. I kind of fell in love with computer science and programming, and figuring out how to build things. And so during my sophomore year of college, I met another group of students that had this crazy idea for a company that they wanted to call Quorum, where we were going to build a bunch of software that was going to like collect all this data about the government and try to create software for people that work in like public affairs. And none of us, all of us similarly had not heard back from any of the big companies that we had applied for to work as software engineers at during the summer. I remember sitting there sophomore year and applying for like, I just going through the list on like Google and trying to find some sort of fit and like coming up dry. And so when there was this opportunity to go and throw a summer at building something real and actually trying to start a business, I was like, heck yeah, that's a fantastic use of a summer. And so we like moved into a house together in Washington, DC, and like wrote code in our bedrooms all day, every day. And by the end of the summer had like a functioning product and like stable revenue and like lots of great customers. And so there was this moment that came of like, wow, we've like built this thing. It is a growing business. Like it has the ability to support us and like might get much bigger than it currently is. We can either go back to school and it will cease to exist, or we can, you know, take a flyer on this crazy thing that we built and like drop out and try to turn it into a real thing. And so I, along with 5 other students, just made the decision to drop out, at least temporarily, to try to build a company. And we got a slightly bigger house in Northwest Washington, and similarly just kept writing code in our bedrooms and like taking the train into town to meet with people on like K Street here to try to build revenue. And yeah, it just like kind of gradually grew over the course of the next 2 years, which was a crazy, wild, incredibly lucky experience that not everyone has working for a startup. There's an incredibly high percentage of them that fail and aren't successful. And it was really, really lucky that the first one that we tried was. I think part of it was that it was a really, really talented group of people. And part of the decision to leave was that I just so much enjoyed like spending time with them and working on something that we all believed in. And then once so after a couple of years when the company was stable and had turned from working in our bedrooms to like working downtown in an office that we could finally afford, there was a moment where it felt like it was time to go finish our degrees. And so those of us that had dropped out to start the company went back to finish. And I dabbled a little bit in the kind of traditional business route. I went and worked at Google for a summer on the business side of Google Cloud Platform. And I think I got more work done in like a week at Quorum than I did an entire summer at Google. And to me, that experience taught me that I just like had caught this entrepreneurship bug, and that was the only thing that was going to be able to make me happy. So I went back to school from that and spent the rest of my time there really focusing on trying to figure out the next like thing that I wanted to work on, and eventually landed on this problem that called public notice, which is this really old system in America for distributing notifications to the public through print newspapers, which my family have run for the past 5 generations. And it's this really old, antiquated process and system with a bunch of paper legal documents, and it was just like, aha, that's another broken thing that I'm gonna go try to fix. So that's what I did for all of my like extra free time, and then took like the entrepreneurship classes at school, and sort of gradually built this snowball into something that I could pursue after graduation. So I moved back to DC, where I'm now in WeWork. This is like the panel room of the WeWork that we're renting as our office space, and still going after it.
I love that. I love that you're presenting as if everybody's in person. That's the energy I really wanted today. I wanted to pivot a little bit and talk about, I guess, structure and planning. I think for myself in particularly, consulting and banking was such an attractive option to me because there's so much structure. And coming from an immigrant background, when my mom, and seeing like the amount of work my mom put in to really set me up for success, I really felt that I needed to pay her back by going into something that has more stability, and that there was very concrete goals I can make. And I'm wondering, you know, for all our panelists here, how have you thought about, you know, your goals, and how have you thought about, you know, and obviously you all have put on many hats throughout the years. How has that goal changed, and how have you been able to adapt to that?
You know, I'll take that question. So I'm obviously an immigrant. I'm from Hong Kong. My family still lives there. I think, you know, to be fair to many of the other panelists, venture capital of all of the different alternative industries that you can go into is relatively more stable, and has relatively more structure. Back when I was applying to venture capital, it was not a very well-known industry. It was not something where there were built-out programs. I was lucky enough to have met someone through an affinity group when I was in college who was part of the venture capital industry, and he talked me through basically what the different roles were, what the different options were, which firms were most likely to be hiring kids out of college versus hiring, you know, more experienced hires laterally, what the job entailed. And in that sense, kind of built up a lot of the structure for me. And, you know, I think, you know, it's a completely fair call out to say that you need more stability. And that's something that I thought a lot about going from a more finance focused job to a startup, essentially, where there's a much higher risk profile. From a salary perspective, it is a step down. I think, you know, for my parents at least, as long as I can fulfill my obligations to them, whatever they are, and live in a fairly comfortable way by, you know, both my standards and what I'm sure my parents would think is comfortable. That for me were kind of the 2 boxes that were checked. Ultimately, I'm lucky to have parents who really just want me to be happy. And as long as I can support myself and fulfill my obligations to them, it was fine. But it did take a lot of digging and a lot more information searching to ensure that I was adjusting and applying for a job where the risk profile made sense for me and what I was looking for.
Should I go next? Oh, yes, I love the point that Rachel had made just about like that stability and the structure, because you know, it's totally a thing. Like, you know, you don't realize that being in like a corporate job gives you like a really big cushion, in the sense of like, you're going to get paid this steady paycheck with typically good benefits. You're going to have set amount of vacation days, and there's going to be XYZ to get to X position, right? Whereas like doing that in a startup setting is going to be a little bit more ambiguous. But, you know, I can say like personally, I actually just turned down a full-time blockchain job And it was like definitely really shitty, but personally, but I think that it was like at a startup, and for me, I I saw that there were certain places that I had attained in terms of how much I was getting paid in my current corporate job, and and I already have like a promotion in my pocket, for instance, and this startup just could not assure that kind of growth, or I guess security, that I had already attained. And it was something just like, as the daughter of immigrants, as someone who's queer and Asian American, like I didn't want to give that up. And so it really like stung to say no. But I was also like, there's an aspect here of like, I need to value myself. And if you guys don't see the value that I'm providing, as someone from this like very specific background, and it's not a background that is typical of the crypto or blockchain space, then like how much do you care about D&I? And it's unfortunately those really tough questions that kind of come up like as you're debating between like where you want to go. And I guess like stepping a little bit back, like my parents, my mom's also from Hong Kong. Like they didn't explicitly tell me that I needed to get a degree in law or business or be a medical doctor, but they just like the look on their face when I told them I was going to major in English. They were like, and so I was like, okay, fine, I'm going to go to like pharmacy school or so, I'll get my PharmD, I promise. And that didn't happen either. But I do think that they are definitely breathing a sigh of relief that I'm making well more than I thought I would ever be making this early in my career, just because pharmaceutical advertising is like such a niche space. And so I feel like, which does like have its ethical implications, as do many, every single corporate job you will land yourself in. But I will say that like, having attained this kind of level, it's not just security for myself, it's also security for my parents. And, and that's kind of where it really stung to say no to like that blockchain startup, because it was my dream. It's like kind of like a dream role, but, the growth not being there, salary not being there, and just the ambiguity of the place I'd be working was something that I didn't want to take away that security from myself nor from my parents in a lot of ways.
Thank you so much for sharing. I just wanted to call out that in the chat, there's lots of love. Ingrid says, yes, value yourself, clap, clap emoji. We've got another participant, Isabella, saying literature majors for the win. As somebody who studied women's and gender studies and cultural studies, that completely resonates with me. I would love to also transition to another question from one of our guests. Jason Guo asks, one of my concerns for joining a smaller company or business is the smaller or lack of an LGBTQ network. So how did that factor into, for Jake pursuing entrepreneurship, for Rachel pursuing more of a tech-oriented role, and for Nicole pursuing crypto stuff?
I can speak to this one first, and let me start by saying that there is an incredible network of LGBT entrepreneurs out there that are like, first of all, between entrepreneurs generally, there's this kind of honor among thieves where you will do anything you can to help each other. But then you take, within that, there's this really tightly knit community of LGBT entrepreneurs. And so I've gotten to know various organizations. Like, I think the one that comes to mind is Start Out, which is a nonprofit that sponsors panels like this at conferences like this occasionally. And I've spoken on one of their panels at like Reaching Out MBA, and like where they will put up booths in the career fair alongside other big companies and try to convince people to pursue entrepreneurship instead of going the corporate route. But it's a fiercely loyal network of people that is out there once you take the plunge and start down this career path. Rachel, I know, used to or still does run a network of angel investors that help support budding LGBT entrepreneurs. There's a really, really great support network. And then, you know, if you choose to pursue entrepreneurship, you like get to create the culture within your own company. Like my company when we started was like 60% LGBT actually on the founding team, and has since obviously that we haven't been able to sustain that, but have been able to build a really inclusive and diverse community since getting started. So it's been really, really rewarding to get to steer that because I really care about it.
I guess I'll go next. In joining Stripes, Stripes was a 20-person firm when I first joined. They're now 40 people. I think when I was coming out of school, that decision honestly didn't factor as much into you know, how I was choosing a career path. Truthfully, I don't know that I ever imagined a world in which it would be okay for me to be out. You know, having interned in Hong Kong, which was a very closed environment, and certainly at a bank in Hong Kong where it is very conservative. And then, you know, coming to the US, I had automatically assumed that that was not an option for me. You know, one thing that I've realized in switching from the investor side to the startup side is, on the startup side, it's actually a much more open environment, you know, at least what I've experienced. You know, Frame.io is an incredibly diverse and welcoming place, and our D&I committee is very, very invested in making sure that we have representation at all levels of our organization. We hold ourselves to OKRs at the company level, which are basically trackable company goals on D&I. And so there's a lot more conversation about diversity and inclusion at my company now, which arguably is more of a quote unquote startup-y environment than there was in venture capital. And so I think, you know, outside of just the size of the LGBTQ community where you work, there's also the nature of the industry itself. Venture capital is a naturally, or not naturally, it is a much more cis, white, male dominated industry with a lot of microaggressions baked into it by virtue of the people who are part of that industry. And so, you know, yeah, that's definitely something you want to think about. But, you know, oftentimes if it's a smaller company, what you need to think more about are the actual people rather than the structures that these folks are building in these companies to allow for D&I. Because, you know, even if it's a small community, if it is a group of really high quality, fantastic people who actively care about it, you know, there's still an option to have a really wonderful environment where you feel comfortable being yourself.
I'll say that from, okay. I'll say that from like the blockchain and crypto space, it's not the most well known for being super inclusive since like a lot of the space is kind of like, you know, younger cis white guys. And I have found it kind of interesting though, is that there is a large number of queer and trans folks like in the space, like more than I anticipated. And I think more than you would expect from like this mashup baby from like finance and tech. So I've been like really happy about that, but you know, at the same time, it's that is not to say that they're doing great on like the sexism and the racism, for instance. So that is a consideration that I do take as I'm like exploring these opportunities and just thinking about like partnerships or people I want to associate myself with. But yeah, I mean, as Rachel said, like a lot of it's going to come down to you doing those interviews with the people that are actually in the startup. And like, don't be like, take it as a good sign if you end up having like 7 interviews or something where you're meeting like the entire team, because that's really what you want to do, is you want to get a sense of who they are as people, and they're trying to get a sense of who you are as a person. And I think that there can be a lot of flexibility in that working at a startup. So, you know, if you vibe really well with the people there, but maybe they don't totally get this diversity and inclusion queer stuff, then there's kind of like an opportunity for you to build out that culture. Whereas that's typically something that is more kind of set with an older corporate culture that may or may not have a lot of older cis white straight guys as in advertising. And, you know, when they're creating that culture, it's kind of like it's a different game, because in some ways, depending on how much they are invested in it, you know, you might have support systems like mentorship programs and affinity groups, where they're going to be a lot more heavily scrutinized for kind of like making those tangible D&I efforts. And I think that especially now, many companies are pretty much dumping a lot of money into D&I because they haven't in like the past 20 years. So, you know, it's a different host of problems wherever you go, just living, existing as a queer person and being able to roll with those punches and figure out what makes sense for you in the moment, or based off the current needs you have, you know, roll with that.
Thank you so much for sharing. I kind of want to follow up on that point that you and Rachel both made in terms of doing those interviews and figuring out if this is a community of people that is going to be supportive of us as people, as individuals. But I'm wondering how you approach, and are there specific questions you ask maybe to figure out if it's actually a culture they're trying to build, or if it's just corporate talk that, you know, they're pushing out.
I'll say that one of the best questions, by the way, did not ask very good questions when I was interviewing, so I'm not going to mention any of the questions that I said. One of the candidates that recently interviewed for a role at Frame.io asked a really good question, which was, you know, specifically, what is your company doing broadly in D&I, and how are you tracking the results? I think the intention both to drill into specifics and to ask how folks are actively tracking results are two very, very simple things that you can ask just to flag whether people are even doing anything. If they're saying, yeah, we're trying to make sure our pipeline is as diverse as possible, that is not an action that is not specific. And that is a very bad answer from an employer who maybe wants to pay lip service to D&I, but actually is not doing anything about it. A better answer might be something about, you know, how they're measuring things at various levels of the organization. And then an even better answer might be, you know, we're actually setting our company goals against these. So, you know, I think just asking a simple question like that and forcing them to be very specific about it will probably help illuminate a bunch of stuff.
Yes, thank you, Alan. Such a good question about questions. Yeah, one that I have used before that came from a friend of mine that is at Google, and is a woman there. So she had suggested that, you know, when you're in the interview, ask if, unless you are, unless you get like the list ahead of time and you're able to kind of like stalk everyone, if you notice that all the people that you're talking to are not, like, none of them are a woman or a person of color, just like straight up ask, like, is there a woman or a woman of color, a person of color that I can speak to more about their experiences in the company? And if they cannot answer that question, it is not, maybe not the best sign. Because yeah, you're trying to really get at those more quantitative, because they're not going to give up qualitatively what's going on. So, you know, having those quantitative measures of like litmus tests, how are they doing? That's kind of what you want to see. And you don't want to also see them shying away from that stuff as well.
I unfortunately don't have a ton to add to the already excellent answers that were given on this question. I like have been, you know, a white dude, so like have not had to think as critically about how to ask these questions and I also haven't been in many job interviews since I like left for the startup world. Like I have kind of, I haven't really done that. So I don't, but I, you know, we just, it is, we set OKRs about this. Like that is how we do it as well. So like looking for that and looking for organizational structure that plants it as a priority for the entire company is I think how you would get at it.
Yeah, and I also want to call out, like, Jake, even though you're a white man, you know, the point is that there are different ways to show up. And I think that's what is so beautiful about this panel is that whatever position you might be kind of, you know, occupying socially and politically, how do you leverage that to find what's right for you and to make the impact you want to have on the world? Want to add, Eric from the chat says, know your worth, honey. And then Isabella has a long question. So I'm going to read this out. So just listen carefully because it's a long one. So, all right. Isabella says, on one hand, I've interned in business at a tech startup and learned a lot and got a lot done because they needed help, but it was low impact beyond the company. But on the other hand, I'm interning right now as an SWE. I'm guessing that means software engineer at a large tech core. And the pace is wildly slow in comparison, but once what I'm making ships in September, I'll get to see the real impact once they're making ships in September. So I'm looking at consulting because I like the dynamism and fast pace and learning opportunities. How do you, the panelists, navigate finding work that has impact and also balances pace and ease of getting things done? Don't apologize for all the thoughts. We love to hear it. We love these students' questions because they're so thoughtful. But if any of you have thoughts there, we'd love to hear it.
Could maybe one of the folks that has done the consulting route or the like multiple different paths take this one first?
Rachel.
See, I don't want to be the person that answers all of the questions first every single time. That's a good question. Yeah, I have to say it probably depends on what the company itself and what you define as impact and fast moving and slow moving. As a software engineer, and Jake can probably speak much better to this than I can, but as a software engineer at a large tech company, you probably have very firm deadlines and production schedules, and you are very siloed into working on one product. So yes, you will definitely stay on task, because if you aren't able to finish all of the work, you'll have a large team to support you and help you with that and make sure that you're staying on the deadline. And you'll probably learn a lot within the specific discipline that you are in. In a smaller kind of startup-y role, you will learn a lot because you are working on 10,000 things at once. It may be more focused on breadth than depth, so you'll get like 10% done across all of these different buckets. But it's definitely a different kind of job. I think for me in particular, I really enjoy wearing a bunch of different hats. I think at Frame, I've had the ability to work across a bunch of different varieties, so much so that I actually haven't even done the job that I was hired for yet, and I'm about a year into the job. I've just been busy doing other things, like being like that flex tape person who is just like patching holes everywhere until so that we can keep the ship moving. So I don't know that I've consciously, and it's a good question, I haven't consciously broken it out, to be perfectly honest. I think I've mostly gravitated towards what I really enjoy, which is getting a good breadth of experiences. What I can focus on is the first 10%. And even though I'm not able to see a project through from start to finish, that's not necessarily where my strengths lie. My strengths lie in what I like to do. Are taking a project from 0 to 10% done, and then having folks take on the 10% to 50%, and then having another bunch of folks take on 50% to 90%, and then having a bunch of specialized folks take from 90% to 100%. It's all just utilizing different skill sets, I think, and I think your impact on the company is a totally separate question. It's something that you should definitely drill into when you work at any role. Going from 0 to 10% doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have an impact. It just means that you aren't as close to the outcome. It's very similar to venture. When you're investing as an early stage investor, all you see is the very early stages of the business. You may cash out before then. You may not be able to see the company all the way through to IPO, but it doesn't mean that you had any less role in the company's success. So I think that's something to keep in mind, but I don't know that really answered the question.
I can hop in. This is first a really, really good question. And philosophically, like, this is something you will be probably wrestling with for a very long time. And I mean, I'm still wrestling with it here because, I mean, I'm still right now in my career. Have my full-time job with my benefits and everything, my corporate job, and then I'm pursuing this like side track of like trying to make what I do find to be impactful work. I'm trying to make that my reality right now. And so I'm kind of like stuck in between. I have my feet in like two different realms at the moment. And I think that on the corporate and pharma side, I definitely don't want to knock where the industry that I'm in super explicitly, but I will say that as far as like the impact that I am making as a creative, a copywriter, for pharmaceutical advertising within this space for the brands that I work on, it's not necessarily the most personally impactful to me, but in terms of like this long-term scope of like how what I'm doing is impacting how well this product is doing. But I will say that like I learned, for example, in working in this job that, I really love being a team player. I love being like that person who steps up and is able to be like reliable when people need me. And, that just knowledgeable of the fact that if I were to let something go and I were not to be able to fulfill that responsibility, that's like 2 or 3 times as much work on the other people on my team. And so I get a lot of gratification out of like doing what I need to at the right time and being really efficient, a good communicator, and just making sure that the working experience that everyone has on my team is as best as it can be. And I'm doing everything that I can to ensure that. So, it's definitely a really challenging question, but so much of this journey that you're about to embark on is going to be trial and error. You're going to like figure out like, oh, there's some things I really don't want to give up on, like my work-life balance, or wow, I can kind of let go of the impact stuff as long as I'm like kind of in a really cushy job and I like my team, even though like the impact may not be there. So there are a lot of ways to I would say even think about impact, and not always does it need to come from like your full-time job. Sometimes maybe your full-time job is what is enabling you to have the means to do like massive grassroots organizing on the side, so there's a lot of mix and match that you can do that I feel like doesn't get talked about as much, but that's the reality. And so revel in the fact that you can wear lots of hats and don't be afraid to have that multitasking really, I guess, be explored in all facets of your life if that's what you want.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is I think the question kind of sets up this dichotomy between like fast-paced, low impact and like slow-paced, high impact work. I like don't think that's I think that's a false dichotomy and like a false choice. And a startup person would tell you that if the work that you're doing at an early stage startup is both high impact for the company and high impact for the world, because most startups are convinced that they are going to change the world in the process of starting the company that they're going to start. But I also would encourage you to think about impact for yourself in terms of like learning and fulfillment, and not just the impact that you might be having on like the business, and trying to find ways that are going to make sure that you are like leveling up as fast as or at least on the in the ways that you want to be.
Just want to say that hearing some affirmation in the chat from Aish saying plus 10,000, is that enough zeros? Plus 10,000 to Jake's statement right there. We had another question. Isabella also said to all of you, thank you so much. That was super helpful. Another question is, was there, thinking back as an undergraduate student, or perhaps even earlier for you, or perhaps even later, postgraduate life, was there a specific moment where you realized, hey, maybe this is not the path that was meant for me? And you were able to kind of gain the courage to start pursuing what you're doing now?
So I was I was pretty far down the recruiting pipeline with like a few big tech companies when I had been working on I meant to like lead off this panel. I met my co-founder for this company at O4U. And we like started talking there and then got back to school, and we happened to go to the same college and like kept talking about eNotice and working on it on the side. And like it came this moment where we had both received or accepted, actually both had accepted job offers with other companies, and had to make this decision of like, we're spending all of our free time working on this thing that we both really love, but like have this other, path that we've already decided on. And it was this really hard look in the mirror of like, isn't the fact that we're spending all of our free time doing this, like, doesn't that mean that this is what it is that we like should be doing? And it was a really tough decision to make, but we both decided yes, and had to tell those companies that we needed to go like start this thing, or else we weren't going to be happy, I don't think. And so we did, and it's been a great decision. But that was really hard to have gone through the whole process of finding a job and thinking that we had it all figured out, and then realizing that something else we were gonna head in a different direction entirely. Which I don't recommend doing that, by the way. Don't start your career by like accepting a job offer and then having to go do it. But it like does happen. And Alan is making fun of me, but but also like don't be afraid to, even no matter how or like where you find yourself, if there's something that you like want to be doing that is what's going to make you the happiest, go do that.
I want to also elevate the fact that Aish, one of our amazing programming directors, is kind of wondering, what is something about your career progression you wish you would have known as a student? Maybe had you had some kind of foresight prior to entering your current roles that would have set you up for better success? Or what advice would you give for students graduating into a post-COVID world and economy?
I'll take a stab at this one as the public health person. Well, I think that like overall, like we always talk about this being like the new normal, and yeah, so it's it's an overused phrase that we're all like sick of now. And I think that part of that is like genuinely this raises a really big philosophical, like societal question around, what are we even returning to? Do we want to return to that? Was it good then? And so I think that this is such a disruptive, chaotic time for people to be making moves, to be starting things, changing. But at the same time, like this is a huge opportunity to really take charge of the future that you want to see. And this is there's huge potential for transformation societally. And just because you think that something might be of value, like based off the pre-COVID days, the same things may not be applicable now. And, we've even seen that in terms of like, just giving presentations. Like people didn't know that you would have to get really good at giving presentations on Zoom and being very good at having like super engaging PowerPoints, but that's something that's been developed. Or to even be able to network really well via Zoom and like to break down that digital barrier and actually like touch something in someone else that is real, that's huge. And so I will say that I don't know what the world is going to look like, but I find myself in a position now where I'm looking at what the world was, and I don't want that world. I want to put my energy towards building something that's going to be better, and not using this opportunity to just recreate a world that we have seen that is pretty broken and not equitable. And so that's really where like this comes in, and philosophically where I see myself in blockchain. But I will just leave you all with the parting thoughts that someone very wise said to me, that you want to focus on building relationships that are not transactional, but that are transcendental. And I think that that has been something that I have followed in my time for the past few years now. And I have found that like it's far more important to just like if you're in a room full of like 100 people, um, I'm not going to say the Lady Gaga quote, I promise. If you're in a room full of 100 people, yeah, you can meet like 50 of them or whatever, and maybe you'll find yourself like a business partner doing, or like someone who can connect you to somebody else who's interested in something. But, I think like for me now, my perspective is like, if I can go into a room with 100 people and there is one person that I'm feeling like is a genuine, real person that cares about like, I don't know, like health disparities in a really genuine way, and that is their true passion, and I'm connecting with them as a person on that, then that's a relationship I want to carry through that is going to be far more long lasting than something I'm doing just to hook up with like the next person in like whatever networking situation.
Awesome. Thank you so much for those lovely responses. I have a question from our student Malik, who asks, what advice do you have for us who are struggling to hone in on a specific career path, and what are ways that you have thought about positioning yourself to figure that out? And I think in that same vein, Gaurav asks, what are your thoughts and experience with side hustles, and is that something that you find to be valid in terms of transforming it into an actual career?
I think it starts right by boiling down. And by the way, anyone who tells you that their career path was extremely, in business, who tells you their career path was extremely well constructed and that every step was very, intentional and they did this because they wanted to get to that and then that's for the most part not true. Most people in business end up where they are because they just happened to be at the right place at the right time. I didn't really know what venture capital even meant when I was graduating out of college. If it had not been for someone I had met through an affinity network who told me what it was, I was like, oh, yeah, that kind of sounds interesting. Let me go pursue that as one of the many options that I was pursuing at the time. I applied to four different industries coming out of college. And based on the people I met, chose the group of people that I thought would be the most fun to work with. And that checked some of the boxes for me in terms of like stability and things that we mentioned before. Coming out of venture capital, I had no concept of what it meant to work at a startup in a business role. I didn't even know what the different types of roles were available at startups. And so where I started was where I started when I graduated out of college, which is boiling it down to, I don't know what overarchingly I want to do. I'm going to boil it down to what do I enjoy doing on a day-to-day basis that I know that I've done before. We're talking to people, so I want a client-facing role. I enjoy, understanding business models, so I want something that's involved in revenue generation at a company. And then going and boiling it down from there became a much easier task because I actually knew all of those individual things that I enjoy doing as opposed to looking at it from an end goal perspective, like, oh, I know exactly that I want to do sales operations. I think 90% of people in the world don't know what sales operations is. And, I certainly didn't coming out of a venture capital role, even though I was working with companies a lot. I was like, okay, there's the management team, and then there's the group of people who does everything else. And I didn't know what that broke down into. So working out what I enjoyed doing based on what I knew I had done, siloing out and figuring out what I did not enjoy doing based on what I had done made it a lot easier to figure out what direction I should go into. And you may find that the collection of things you enjoy doing end up pointing you in 3 different directions. So apply for jobs in those 3 different directions, talk to all of those people. And if you end up working with a group of people that are invested in you and that are just good human beings, you'll often end up happier in your career than trying to chase something that you think you might want.
Okay, I guess I'll jump in. Should I jump in?
I've got 3 minutes. So I'm thinking maybe let's hear a snippet from Nicole and then from Jake. And then we'll read out some shout outs. Actually, I'll read them now. Matthew says, Gaga. This was a while ago. I said, please say the Lady Gaga quote. And then Malik said, building relationships that are not transactional, but transcendental. A quote, a vibe. So a lot of people +1 that. And Michael Rudy, our chair of the board, says, I'm obsessed with everything happening being said on this panel. You're all so inspirational and helpful, which I got second.
I met Michael Ruderman at O4U also, I think, one time. Hello.
Yeah, so feel free to pop in Jake and Nicole. And I'm going to be sharing the screen again so people know how to get in touch with you. People know where to find you. And we'd love to close out in the next couple minutes here.
Yeah, so I guess I'll just add very, very quickly, negative data is also really good data. So just trying things and figuring out what you don't like is just as helpful, if not more helpful, than figuring out what you do actually like. And, I think, again, philosophically, the photons travel from the sun to the earth happens in this like drunken walk where it's just kind of like scattering all about, and that's basically just like life. It's like you don't really know what your next step may be exactly, but the general direction is like towards earth. So I encourage you to just kind of like let go of that sense that you need to know exactly what the next stepping stone is to get to this like very specific place. And side hustles are absolutely valid. Do not let anyone tell you that they are not. I'm on my side hustle now, and I think it's going great.
Yeah, I mean, I basically work in side hustles, so you're going to just get another ringing endorsement from me. And then also just retweeting that negative data is really valid. Like, I don't think I would have had the confidence to go into entrepreneurship if I hadn't worked for the summer at Google. And Google is an incredible place to work. It was a wonderful experience, but it wasn't for me. And so knowing that really emphatically from having that lived experience made me know that, like, in order to be happy and have a fulfilling career, like, this was what I should to just try stuff.
Wow, y'all, we're so grateful for you all sharing your voices and experiences. There's so much more love in the chat that I wish you could all see, but somebody loved the photon analogy. 2 people love the photon analogy. And I want to really encourage folks to, if you were at all inspired, if you at all found any value, please connect with our amazing panelists here. Like, we literally have in our midst, and Rachel, I definitely want to connect with you because I pretty much began my career in sales development, business development in the tech sphere. So I'm really pleased with just, how this panel went, and for Alan for really spearheading just the structure of the panel. And yeah, any last thoughts for our students before they head on out to the next session?
I guess I'll just jump in and say thank you again to our amazing panelists. Thank you for bringing your whole authentic selves and being vulnerable and letting that rawness show, because I think that was really impactful. My final thought is I stayed in the finance trap for 4 years, and now I have to pay $200,000 to go to business school to rectify that mistake. So would love for all of y'all to really consider what our panelists are saying today. That's just for me.
Thank you all so much. We're so happy about you showing up. Have an amazing rest of your day. We'll see you soon.